In 1859, Charles Darwin published The Origin of the Species. Most students today, while familiar with Darwin, are unaware of the full title of his work, which is The Origin of the Species by Means of Natural Selection or the Preservation of Favored Races in the Struggle for Life. In this work, Darwin challenged the origin of animal life on the planet and formalized the evolutionary ideas that had been pondered for centuries. In 1871, Darwin published The Descent of Man, in which he applied this thinking to the origin of mankind itself. More than a century later, Charles Darwin is revered as a prophetic voice for humanism in the scientific community. His theories on evolution are today regarded as scientific fact. The very authorship of life itself, once acknowledged as from a divine creator who made man in his own image, has now been attributed to chance and the coincidence of nature. Yet some researchers argue that Darwin's theory has no foundation in real science, but is rather based on the ancient mystery teachings of the occult.
First, I would say the evolution theory did not start with Charles Darwin. It started way before that. It actually started in the Garden of Eden with Satan, when he said to Eve in Genesis chapter 3, "Eve, if you eat off that tree, ye shall be as gods." The whole idea that man can progress and evolve and become better, is an idea that came from the devil in the Garden of Eden. Satan started that. And then down through history, there have been, who knows how many thousands of folks that have promoted that idea or pushed it. Aristotle taught a form of evolution. Plato taught a type of evolution. The Babylonians, down through history, there's always been folks who taught, that the Egyptians taught we evolved from slime along the Nile River. So Darwin simply made the theory popular. That's all he did. He didn't really invent the theory of evolution. His grandfather, Erasmus Darwin, wrote a whole book called Zoonomia, where he basically laid out everything Darwin said. And Darwin, his grandson, then stole all of his ideas and never gave credit to Grandpa one time. Interesting plagiarism back then. But Darwin's theory, as we call it Darwin's theory, but actually it was way before him. The evolution theory would say that everything is evolving and getting better, and we don't see any of that. We don't see any mutations produce any improvement to the gene pool. Mutation is a scrambling of information that results in a genetic loss. Nobody's ever proven a good mutation. Some people say, well, bacteria become resistant to drugs. I say, well, yeah, that's because they lost information. The antibiotic can't lock onto the ribosome. So it's like somebody's coming through town and they're handcuffing everybody, hauling them off to jail, going to kill them. But you don't have any arms, so they can't handcuff you. You say, wow, that's beneficial. Well, it might be beneficial for the moment, but it's not beneficial in the long term, okay? So these bacteria that are deformed, that have lost information, now are able to be resistant to the drugs only for that particular drug, and only for a short time. When you put them back in the regular population, they're worse off. There's absolutely no evidence whatsoever to back up the evolution theory. Nobody's ever seen a dog come from a non-dog, and we certainly have never seen a dog come from a rock, which is what the evolution theory teaches if you go back, millions of years. Most evolutionists don't even know their own theory. They don't even know that they believe they came from a rock 4.6 billion years ago.
A typical modern science textbook says that 18 to 20 billion years ago, all the matter in the universe was concentrated into one very dense, very hot region that may have been much smaller than a period on this page. For some unknown reason, this region exploded. This explosion is called the Big Bang. Coming out of this Big Bang, a giant rock somehow appeared that was rained on by cosmic rains from millions of years. Evolutionary scientists teach that from this rock supposedly came all the life on planet Earth.
So the evolution theory teaches, 20 billion years ago or sometime in the past, pick a number, nothing exploded and made everything. And then all this stuff was spreading out through space from the Big Bang theory, and then slowly groups of this matter began to get together and condense into planets and stars and moons and stuff like that. And then slowly, very slowly, over billions of years, or quickly if you're from Harvard, one of those planets, Earth, started to develop life, just by chance, of course, took a long time. And then that first life form that slowly evolved out of the soup in the ocean learned how to reproduce itself, which is a pretty good trick, of course, and then slowly turned into different kinds of animals. So elephants and bananas and humans have a common ancestor by the evolution theory. That is pure speculation. It's religious. They believe that. I don't care what they believe, but it's not science.
Darwinian scientists have attempted to explain the process of evolution as a gradual development that takes place over millions of years. Yet some scientists argue that for the building blocks of life, this is simply impossible. Darwin himself admitted that if it could be demonstrated that any complex organ existed which could not possibly have been formed by numerous successive slight modifications, my theory would absolutely break down. Through the 20th century, the complexity of living organisms has revealed itself to be far greater than Darwin ever imagined. At the White House Millennium Council for the year 2000, world-renowned scientist Stephen Hawking commented that our present computers are less complex than the brain of an earthworm, a species not noted for their intellectual powers. Nobel Prize winner Linus Pauling taught that a single cell, the smallest living unit, is more complicated than New York City. In his book, Darwin's Black Box, author and biochemist Michael J. Behe argues that the complexity of cell structure overthrows the idea of a gradual evolution. His conclusions reveal that highly sophisticated molecular machines control every cellular process. Thus, the details of life are finely calibrated, and the machinery of life enormously complex. Behe writes that the simplest self-sufficient cell has the capacity to produce thousands of different proteins and other molecules. Synthesis, degradation, energy generation, replication, maintenance of cell architecture, mobility, regulation, repair, communication, all of these functions take place in virtually every cell, and each function itself requires the interaction of numerous parts. A child can die because of a single defect in one of the many machines needed for taking proteins to the lysosome. A single flaw in the cell's protein transport pathway is fatal. Unless the entire system were immediately in place, our ancestors would have died. He concludes that attempts at a gradual evolution are a recipe for extinction. Behe further rebukes the scientific community for ignoring the evidence. He says the impotence of Darwinian theory in accounting for the molecular basis of life is evident from the complete absence in the professional scientific literature of any detailed models by which complex biochemical systems could have been produced. In the 20th century, other noteworthy scientists have agreed. World-renowned astronomer Sir Fred Hoyle rejected Darwin's theory. It was Hoyle who coined the phrase, the Big Bang. He was, in fact, mocking the idea that all things came about through some great explosion billions of years ago. Hoyle calculated that the odds of producing just the basic enzymes of life by chance are 1 in 1 with 40,000 zeros after it. Hoyle claims that believing the first cell originated by chance is like believing a tornado could sweep through a junkyard filled with airplane parts and form a Boeing 747. He said, the scientific world has been bamboozled into believing that evolution has been proved. Nothing could be further from the truth. Hoyle said this situation is well known to geneticists, and yet nobody seems to blow the whistle decisively on the theory. Most scientists still cling to Darwinism because of its grip on the educational system. You either have to believe the concepts or be branded a heretic. Australian biologist Michael Denton, author of the book Evolution, A Theory in Crisis, says science has so thoroughly discredited Darwinian evolution that it should be discarded. Meanwhile, mathematics professor Wolfgang Smith says evolution is a metaphysical myth totally bereft of scientific sanction. At the British Museum of Natural History in London, paleontologist Colin Patterson started asking other scientists to tell him one thing they knew about evolution. Lecturing to biologists at the American Museum of Natural History in New York City, he said, "I tried that question on the geology staff at the Field Museum of Natural History, and the only answer I got was silence. I tried it on the members of the Evolutionary Morphology Seminar in the University of Chicago, a very prestigious body of evolutionists, and all I got there was silence for a long time, and eventually one person said, 'I do know one thing, it ought not to be taught in high school.'" In spite of the evidence, Patterson did not abandon evolution. He says, "Then I woke up and realized that all my life I had been duped into taking evolutionism as revealed truth in some way." He said he had experienced a shift from evolution as knowledge to evolution as faith. What Patterson described was his own paradigm shift from scientist to Darwinian worshiper. His idol, the cathedral of evolutionary thought. This trend among scientists has been acknowledged by others in the scientific community.
The building behind me is London's Natural History Museum. It looks rather like a cathedral or a church, and in a way that's what it is. It's a kind of temple to Darwin's theory of evolution. People come to museums like the Natural History Museum to get answers to their question, have we evolved from apes? Do humans and apes share a common ancestor? And to look at an exhibit like this, you'd think that question had been answered decisively yes. But the answer is far from decisive. In fact, this representation is an interpretation of the fossils, the interpretation of one group of scientists. There are other interpretations, but you won't find them in this museum or any other museum in the world.
In the days of early America, the Founding Fathers held few doubts that man had been created rather than evolved. The Declaration of Independence says plainly, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created, and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights." The Founding Fathers maintained that the rights and liberties of men were defended by the authority of God, who created them. But if mankind merely evolved, then a man's rights are established only by man's opinion. As that opinion changes, the rights of men can also change, as was the case in Nazi Germany.
Hitler believed that evolution was true and the inferior races need to be eliminated, and he had a list.
Hitler's opinion was that Jews and people considered genetically inferior should be eliminated from society. The Nazis relied upon the Darwinian view of the natural selection of favored races to further their own ideas on the struggle for life. In fact, Hitler's book, Mein Kampf, means my struggle, a struggle the Nazis clearly defined as demonstrated by this propaganda film. In the opening scene, the narrator makes direct reference to Darwin's teaching on natural selection.
Alles Lebensschwache geht in der Natur unfehlbar zugrunde. Wir Menschen haben gegen dieses Gesetz der natürlichen Auslese in den letzten Jahrzehnten furchtbar gesündigt. Wir haben unwertes Leben nicht nur erhalten, wir haben ihm auch Vermehrung gewährt. Die Nachkommen dieser Kranken sahen so aus. Erbgesunde Menschen wohnten in engen, lichtlosen Gassen und halb verfallenen Lauben. Idioten und Schwachsinnigen baute man aber Paläste, und diese kranken Menschen waren gar nicht empfänglich für die Schönheit, mit der man sie umgab. Das deutsche Volk kennt das ganze Ausmaß dieses Elends wohl kaum. Es kennt nicht den drückenden Geist jener Häuser, in denen Tausende lallende Schwachsinnige künstlich ernährt und gepflegt werden müssen, die tiefer stehen als jedes Tier. In den letzten 70 Jahren hat sich unser Volk um 50% vermehrt, während die Zahl der Erbkranken im gleichen Zeitraum